Bear with me. Promise I got him to stand up before. And this is why I don't work with props. Okay, we'll leave them like that. Sometimes you got to know when to fold. I don't want to keep you here all day. Besides, we have a very important holiday coming up that we have to talk about. Not Halloween, but the holiday that comes a little bit after, the one that comes in November. The holiday of Thanksgiving, exactly. Now, if you're like me, you probably heard the Thanksgiving story, a little bit of a myth maybe, way back when you were in preschool or kindergarten, right? The Puritans came over to America looking for freedom to oppress others the way they had been oppressed. Maybe that part was left out, but that really is what they wanted to do. The Puritans arrived in America and they were, shall we say, ill-equipped to be able to establish themselves here in this country. Sorry, got to get that tucked up in there. And so what happened next? Got to go back to kindergarten, folks. They got some help, right? The friendly Native Americans, who usually in my elementary school were dressed as though they were Plains Indians, only a few thousand miles off, showed up, and they taught them how to grow food that would work native to the United States, and thus they were able to have a huge harvest during the summer months, and come autumn, they could all sit down and enjoy the feast together, the Feast of Thanksgiving, which is basically a riff off of Sukkot, the holiday that is mentioned in the Torah. But there is something that struck me, just recently, in fact, which just shows that sometimes you can still learn new things, about how that story is told. That story is told that emphasizes the generosity and the kindness of the Native Americans, which is wonderful and beautiful, and however much is true, is certainly a welcome sign of how one people can treat another. But the part that was missing, that finally burst forth into my mind, is the Puritans never asked for help. Right, the way the story is told, the Puritans are there, struggling, having no success, preparing to basically die, and then Deus ex machina, the Indians float down like angels and show them what to do. Nowhere do they mention the Puritans were desperate enough that they went to the locals and said, "Help! We are not making enough food. Our crops are not growing well enough. We don't know what we can eat safely from the natural things. Help!" That part is skipped over in the retelling. We get the desperation and we get the assistance, but you never hear about the request. And I think that is precisely because they were Puritans. Right? The Puritans have a very particular religious ideology. It's built in much of European ideology, especially after the Reformation, which is, if God wants you to survive and thrive, you will survive and thrive. If God doesn't, you won't. And nobody should complain about it. What you should do is work hard, pray hard, and then you will be rewarded. Asking for help, what kind of wimp asks for help? What kind of crybaby sheds tears about their lot in life? If you are suffering, you probably deserve it. And if you ask for help, you are just showing how weak you are. This work ethic, as it often is described, is actually quite unethical, and more importantly, quite un-Jewish. Right? Jews, are we Stoics? Do we look at the problems of the world and simply say, "It is nothing to me. They cannot affect me. I will not shed a tear for any of the calamities that befall me or the world around me"? Is this a Jewish attitude? No. No. Right? We are kvetchers. We are complainers. We are criers. We are people who tear our clothing literally at different occasions to show our grief and trouble. And we are people who ask for help. Look at Avram Avinu. He's still called Avram at the moment, at this point for what we read publicly. He is sent all the way from Ur Kasdim, which is basically down in Basra in southern Iraq, up to Haran, which is in the area of Syria today, and then down into the land of Israel with the promise that this will be his land. And he comes in, and there's a famine. What does he do? Well, he has to go get help. He has to go someplace where there is more food. And when he goes, he knows that he will be in danger because his wife is so beautiful that they would likely kill him to get to her. I know how he feels. So, what does he do? He asks Sarah for help. He asks Sarah for help. Please help me pretend to be my sister so they won't kill me to get to you. He asks her for help. When we come back a little bit later on, there is a problem. His wealth has grown so considerable, as has his nephew's lot, that now the workers for each are beginning to get into quarrels about who gets best grazing land for the flocks. So what does Abraham do? He goes and he talks to Lot and he says, look, help me work this out. We need to find a solution here. Lot ends up moving down to Sodom, which as we find out is not such a great idea when it gets invaded, as we read about this morning. And when the invasion happens, somebody runs to Abraham, tells him the news, and what does Abraham do? He asks for help. I know it may seem like it's glossed over, but it mentions quite clearly that Abraham went to his allies, and he went to the 318 men that were of arms-bearing age, that lived with him in his community that he had built, and they set off after Lot and the others who had been taken captive. He asked for help. And at the end of the part that we read today, he is lamenting that he has no children, that he is going to have to hand over everything that he has gained to his servant, which isn't a bad guy, but it's, not quite the same as having your own kid, it seems. So what does he do? He asks God for help. Please. Please. This is Abraham modeling a pattern that will become commonplace throughout our tradition. When there is a problem, you ask for help. You ask for help from God. You ask for help from other people. You do not bottle it up. You do not pretend that everything is fine. You do not act like you are somehow responsible for solving every difficulty in your life. Instead, you turn to other people and say, look, I can't do this on my own. I can't do this on my own. And that is not an admission of weakness. That is an admission of humanity. That is an opportunity for the other person to be able to help you and thereby perform a great mitzvah as well. God did not design us to be individuals. God designed us that we would rely upon one another. For what do we find way back in Genesis, only a couple weeks ago now? Hopefully you've been paying attention. What do we find when God creates Chava, creates the first woman that is going to go with the first man? How does he describe their relationship? A helpmate, right? She will be his help for him. That they will be a pair, right? Not that each will be a standalone, completely isolated, hermeneutically sealed human being which has no need of anyone else in the world or no need of anything else. But no, you are built deliberately to need other people. You are built with the inadequacies. Indeed, when we say a blessing after foods other than the bread or other than other special forms, but most regular types of foods, meat, eggs, that kind of stuff, we specifically thank God for making us with needs, for needing to eat, for needing to support ourselves, that we are not self-sufficient. We are inculcated again and again and again. You cannot do this alone. You cannot do it alone, nor can those around you do it alone. You will turn to them, and they will turn to you. This is what your life should be, and this is what your community should be. But ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you asked for help? I mean, legitimately asked for help. How many of you are uncomfortable even going to the customer service desk in a store? And I don't just mean right now because of COVID, I mean in general. When was the last time you were looking around for something in a shop and somebody came up to you and said, can I help you? And you said, no, I'm just looking. When in fact you actually needed help finding something. When was the last time you had a difficult problem? Something that was wrong in your yard that you needed some advice on. And you turned to Google before you turned to your friends who you know are avid gardeners. Or you turned to Google before you turned to your friend who knew about cars. Or you turned to Google before you asked your friend about a problem you were having with maybe a discipline issue with one of your children. Or a coworker who was causing trouble at work. When was the last time you turned to another human being for these questions, rather than turning to an anonymous black box which doesn't know you, and I hate to break it to you, doesn't care about you? When was the last time you asked for help? If you can't remember, and if you're not sure because you're still enraptured by our Protestant puritanical idea, remember that what cannot stand by itself will easily stand with something else. That which is impossible to stand on its own will be able to stand in an instant if it just has something else to lean against, and it lets that something else lean against it. This balance is how we were made, and it is to our own disadvantage if we run from it. And it is the source of all blessing that we can receive and that we can give when we finally recognize we were made to give help and we were made to receive it. Be alert for those opportunities you can have to give help, and be ready to ask when you need it. Shabbat Shalom.